Welcome to Pepperl+Fuchs Purge Pressurization video series. In part one of the 5500 manifolds, we talked about the different types of valves we offer as well as the hardware that comes with them. In this video, we're going to talk about the setup and the operation of them. This panel represents the customer's application. What we have here is off to your right is the 7500 control unit, which could also be the 5500 control unit. And then we have a filter regulator, that's optional, and the valve itself. And this happens to be the 5500 MAN UL certified valve. This could also be a ATEX certified valve or the CSA FM certified valve. Now, one thing to note here is that this valve, the UL certified valve, is explosion proof. Even though it has a Class 1 Division 2 certification, it is not non-incentive. It is only explosion proof, which means you must put conduit seal on it and within 18 inches of the wires in here. So this is explosion proof, and the control unit there has a tube coming out of it, and that's the reference pressure inside the enclosure. To indicate the enclosure pressure inside the enclosure, there's a differential pressure switch in the 7500 as well as the 5500 series, and that tubing references the pressure. All right, so we have here a working display. 7500 is on, and I have about 30 psi connected to this enclosure. Now, the idea is that this valve will purge and then pressurize the enclosure. So it's going to purge it by the 7500 will energize the solenoid valve on here for a certain amount of time, and then it will shut off the valve, and the needle valve that's embedded into this system will take over. So during setup, you must set the needle valve so that the pressure is above P1. When it gets above P1, it will automatically energize the solenoid valve, which will have a high flow rate of air going inside the enclosure to purge it. Now, this air supply, the pressure inside the enclosure must get above P3. As long as it gets above P3, the unit will start to count down. Once it counts down to 0, then it de-energizes the solenoid valve, slows down the airflow because it's going through the needle valve, and then you're just compensating for leakages within the enclosure. Now we're going to see how this operates. We had it set up, and then we need to set the enclosure pressure in order for it to start purging. So in order to do that, I have this hex key, which is included with the 5500 UL certified manifold. On the other manifolds, there's a key that you set this. But for the UL one, you need a hex key with it. So I go down here, I have 30 psi on here, and I turn this clockwise to start opening up the needle valve. And you will see and you will hear the airflow. Once that gets above P1, it's going to start turning on this solenoid valve, and then you'll really hear the air flowing in. So once we do this, you see the air the pressure start to increase until it reaches a certain value. I had that for a 10-second purge time. So it purges the enclosure for 10 seconds, and this all depends on the size of the enclosure and the flow going through the vent. And you can see with the vent, they have flow curves for enclosure pressure and flow rates. So I have, the pressure was above P3. I know I got the proper flow. I purge it for 10 seconds. After that, it de-energizes the solenoid valve, and now the needle valve takes over. And now I have enough pressure in there above P2 to keep everybody happy. So now the equipment inside the enclosure can operate and be safe. As long as the pressure is above P2, then you can energize the equipment inside the enclosure and everything is operating properly. Now, what happens below P2? You're still above P1, which is your safe pressure. If it gets below P1, then you have to sound an alarm or shut off the enclosure power. But we have an additional feature in this system where if it gets below P2, we can energize the solenoid valve so that it gets above P2 and it will shut off. So if it gets below, it turns on. When it gets above, it shuts off. It's sort of like compensating for abnormal leakages. Right now we have a standard leakages through the enclosure, and we're compensating it. But if you get an abnormal condition where it starts to leak, then we compensate for that through the solenoid valve. And I'll show this by opening up the valve a little bit. You'll see that the pressure starts to drop, and you'll hear the valve start to energize. Hear that? So what happens is it dropped, it kicked on the solenoid valve, the pressure went back up, and right now it's sealed. So if I do that again, introduce a little bit of a leakage, you'll see that it kind of like kicks back up the pressure. I want to thank you for viewing this video, and please like and share.